Hey guys, Scott here, and today Behavior released some interesting statistics for patch 6.1, and I like statistics and I like looking at things that have changed over time based on the changes that they've made. And from what we can see, I guess this sort of settles the whole who got the better end of the deal for the whole recent meta shakeup. It seems like killers have objectively gotten a bit more of a buff compared to survivors because their kill rates have gone up by about 8% and survival rates have gone down by about the same as well. So that's pretty much the only conclusion we can really draw from this, though, and it's important to take that in mind because when they gather these statistics, they don't really take any skill, into account whatsoever. It's just basically the entire player base counts as one giant data group. And because of that, you have a lot of oddities, like killers like Nurse being the worst, for example, or killers like Pinhead being the best in their previous data examples. Those are the cases that we have to just sort of learn to ignore because this accounts for everybody that plays the game, from someone with 1 hour to someone with 10,000 hours. So these statistics don't really mean much in terms of overall balance. It just means that overall, killers are a bit stronger than they were previously, which was the goal. When I think that's something that kind of should have happened. Now I think we can maybe move towards the whole solo queue getting a bit of a buff as well to bridge that gap. And then I think the game, barring map design, is going to be in a really, really good spot, which is, a long time coming. So that's really, really good. But first, let's look at some interesting stats. The most used killer perk in the game is now Jolt, which is weird because I feel like I never see Jolt. I don't even like the perk Jolt. And yet, for some reason, it's used 19% of the time, which is insane. Well, actually, that's not true. I think the 19% usage rate was referring to barbecue and chili, but still, the first most used perk right now is Jolt. Jolt, if you're unaware, is the perk when you down a survivor. Every gen in your radius explodes, and that's pretty much it. That's all it does. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's kind of situational, but if you're playing for a 3 gen, it can be very strong. So it did recently get buffed as well. The cooldown was removed from it, so that is pretty nice. But yeah, other than that, barbecue and chili obviously was the most used killer perk prior to this change because, the double blood points, obviously everyone is going to want to do that. And since that's not the case, I still find it pretty amazing that it's still third best. Like, it's still a decent information perk, don't get me wrong, but the fact that it's still the third most used perk, you know what I think it really is? I think it's the third most used perk because not everybody reads patch notes and not everybody goes to Twitter and Reddit and forums and reads what's changing to the game. I think it's literally just people that have forgotten to take the perk off, with some people actually still wanting to retain the perk. And I think that's the case for a lot of these things. As we'll see down below, SelfCare is still the most used, despite being a terrible perk. And I think it's literally people that just don't read patch notes, because I have a feeling most of the player base is not like the people watching these videos and watching, other content creators and streamers and getting, live updates every hour about the game. It's people that are just like, hey, I want to play some DBD, and then just they go fuck off to their normal lives again when they're done. So I think that's the main reason a lot of the most popular perks are still somewhat in there, because people just don't read the patch notes or care. And that's pretty enlightening to how much people actually pay attention to huge changes to this game. But yeah, those are the currently 3 most used killer perks right now. Pretty interesting stuff. Of note, the other 10 most used killer perks are Sloppy Butcher, Say the Best for Last, Overcharged, Thanatophobia, Call Up Brian, No Ed, and Corrupt Intervention. All honestly pretty solid perks. Nothing too crazy there. Jolt climbed from 13% to 19%. That makes sense. And Pain Resonance, since the whole Scream nerf, dropped by 3%, but still very common and also a very strong perk to begin with. And yeah, overall, that's a lot more. I mean, look, we were looking for a meta shakeup. That is a meta shakeup. They changed things that had a 40% use and they basically moved everything closer together. So, this perk isn't a billion times better than this perk. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of that going on. We still have perks like Beast of Prey and, Territorial Imperative and stuff like that are still absolutely terrible. But they're starting the ball. The ball is rolling for the meta shakeup, and it's good so far. They have proven that they are actually shaking things up quite a bit. Now, for Survivor, Dead Hard dropped from 42% to 19%, which good. Fuck Dead Hard. That perk was very obnoxious and it was just simply too strong. That is one of the few things in the game that truly just straight up needed a nerf, and I'm glad it did get a nerf. Now, Dead Hard is still very decent against a lot of killers like Huntress, Wesker. I've been playing Wesker nonstop. Dead Hard is very strong against Wesker because you can just reaction uses Dead Hard to a Wesker dash, and it's just not really going to do much. for the Wesker. So it's still decently useful. But again, the whole point of the meta shakeup is everything was, there's no 40% usage perk anymore. It's gone down significantly. But still, one of the funniest things that I have found is that self-care is still the most used perk. And like I said, I think that is mostly just because people that had it on previously don't know that it was made to be even worse. And most people that play this game are just not good at it. That's how number distributions work. Most people are going to be average or below average. And so those are usually the types of players that are using self-care. Anyone that really knows how the game works knows self-care is a terrible, terrible perk. It is horrible in almost every regard. There are some meme things you can do where you combine it with like hyper focus and make it a bit better. But perks like Circle of Healing are just objectively better. There is just no argument to be had there. Self-care is a terrible perk. It takes like 40 something seconds to self-care now. It's ridiculous how long it takes. And yet it is still the most used perk. But it used to be 42%. So the usage of self-care was literally halved in terms of actual percentage player base. And I think the only reason that a lot of people are still using it is because they don't know it was nerfed. It was one of the most common perks because of new players. New players, they get clawed at. It's, I remember when I was new to the game, I thought self-care was an incredibly good perk. Now, granted, it was a bit stronger back then. But I really thought self-care was an amazing perk. I was like, oh, I don't need a teammate for anything like that. And I can just heal myself immediately. That is really, really useful. But, as you play more and more, you realize the time efficiency of self-care is so terrible. It's better just stay injured and just work on gens injured. Or bring a brown medkit and heal in a fourth of the time. You can get a brown medkit every blood web. It's not that hard. There are perks that give you medkits, things like that. You can use pharmacy. You can use botany knowledge. Like, there's just so many things you can do that are better than self-care. But most people just don't know that. So that's why self-care is still the most used. Dead Hard again, still the second most used, which is pretty amazing considering how much worse it is in comparison. It's still, like I said, very good, but it is significantly worse. And it used to essentially be a free escape from a chase, not a free escape, a free mistake rectifier. You could fuck up and it wouldn't really matter because you could just still go. So that was taken out of significant usage, which is really good. And Windows of Opportunity, strangely enough, is now the third most used perk. Again, I think this really is the whole new player aspect that a lot of us that make content on this game don't really pay attention to because, it's just making videos for like brand new players that aren't really interested in learning the data and stuff like that about the game. It doesn't really matter up until they really want to start investing time into the game. Then all the videos like I make start mattering where we have like in-depth analysis and discussions and stuff. But yeah, to a new player, they don't give a shit about that. So Windows of Opportunity does make a lot of sense for being here because it lets you basically have the map highlighted for you when you're learning the maps. Once you start to actually learn the maps, it becomes a lot less useful. It's still useful sometimes in solo queue so you can see what palettes have been used and stuff like that. But for the most part, Windows of Opportunity gets less and less useful the better and better you get at the game. But still, this is kind of proof that this is really encompassing the entire player base, not just the people that know how to play the game. The escape rate, though, has dropped by, math. I'm so bad at math. 9%. And that is pretty significant. So it's only a 39% escape rate now, which, thinking about my solo queue games, it seems about accurate. I'm escaping in about 1 to 3 of my games. So that seems to be about accurate. I think what needs to happen now is solo queue needs to get a tiny bit of a buff, and then maps need to be looked at. Once those two things are fixed, we only have a couple of weird outliers like Nurse and like Blight add-ons and stuff like that. But we start getting into a scenario in which this game is actually balanced, and that is a scary prospect in my opinion. I do think and have always thought I made the video, I think 4 years ago, the biggest problem in this game is map design. You can have a Shelter Woods with 5 pallets or a Garden of Joy with 22 pallets, one game after the other, and this is the same game with no differences. That is ridiculous. That is the main cause of every balancing complaint in this entire game because someone could be completely correct saying Survivor is too weak on Shelter Woods, and someone can be completely correct saying Killer is too weak on Garden of Joy, for example. And they're both right at the same time because the maps are so insanely varied and random that there's no way to find any meaningful data in it whatsoever. So this data is pretty interesting to look at, but it really doesn't say too much about the game's balance other than that killer got a bit stronger. That's pretty much the only information you can take from things like this. And it's interesting to see, and I always appreciate the transparency, so definitely awesome to read, but try not to take anything too seriously. Don't take any huge glaring viewpoints or anything like that, because this does account for the entire player base, half of which have no idea what they're doing and should not be used for balance. I'm not saying that we use, comp players for balance either, but a healthy middle ground between the two is, I think, the ideal target. Other than that, though, cool data. I'm glad to see it. And yeah, good work behavior so far. Keep it up. And I'll see you next time.